Hey everyone, welcome back to Talking Sense. I'm Ben. I thought, it's the end of the year, I'd just do a kind of roundup of the top, actually turns out 10 fragrances that I wore a lot of this year. It was really easy to pick these out because generally speaking, I don't tend to wear fragrances. I mean, I've got a lot of fragrances I wear once or twice a year or maybe a month. So, fragrances that I tended to wear a lot of really stuck out and in my memory this year. So yeah, I looked over my collection and I just picked out the bottles that I remembered. I was like, yeah, I wore a lot of that during this period, or I wore a lot of that during this period. It turned out it was 10 fragrances. So it just turns out that it's a perfect number for a top 10. So there you go. So yeah, I guess this is the top 10 fragrances that I wore this year. Without further ado, let's just crack straight into it. So roll it all the way back to spring of 2021. I wore a lot of the Impudent Cousin Matthew by Penhaligon's. The notes in Impudent Cousin Matthew are mandarin orange, petitgrain and patchouli. So it's quite a simple one really. It's it's just a simple freshie, but it's a really nice one. And like I said, I normally don't buy a lot of freshies. I to be honest, bought this one mostly. You want to come and chat with the video people? Yeah, I bought this one mostly because of because it's so fresh. Yeah, so ignore the dog. This is the way we're doing this now, I guess. Yeah, I bought it mostly because I don't have a lot of freshies and I wanted something fresh for the spring and it was on sale, so I just thought, why not? But it actually turned out I ended up really enjoying it. And it's a simple fragrance and it has sort of a designer aspect to it, despite the price. It has a bit of a designer feel to it in that it's quite sheer and it's quite easy to wear, and it's got a bit of that petitgrain gives it a sort of green, fresh, clean, soapy edge to things. So it's definitely got that, but at the same time then you've got that kind of like mandarin on the top. I don't really feel like a lot of the patchouli. I suppose it's the greenness of it, but it's not a dank patchouli at all. It's a very clean, fresh green smell. So yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I wore it a lot throughout the spring. And I say, there are a lot better freshies out there, and I think probably on other channels where they're more into their freshies, perhaps like they would look down on this a little bit. But as for someone like myself who's not really big into freshies, I found a lot to like in this actually. One thing I thought it did remind me of a lot was Ballade Sauvage by Christian Dior and the Privé line, which I found actually they were very similar, but Ballade Sauvage has a fig note that's in there. Otherwise, they were very similar, and I enjoyed it. But I say, I probably, perhaps if I were you, probably wouldn't respect my opinion on freshies too much because I'm not really a sort of too up on my freshies. But I did enjoy this. Sticking with freshies, we'll go with another one that I wore a lot in the spring, but more so in the summer this year, was Oud Mineral by Tom Ford. So the notes in Oud Mineral are sea notes, sea salt, seaweed, oud, ambergris, styrax, pink pepper, balsam fir, pepperwood or Hercules Club. It's, I mean, to say oud, not really. It's one of those kind of like classic kind of fragrances where they stick oud in there, but I can't say I really smell it. What I do smell is it is a very salty marine fragrance, but it like the name implies, it's very minerally, like mineralistic. It's got a very like sort of granite, almost kind of like stony quality to it. It smells like to me like wet pebbles on the beach. That kind of vibe to it, and at the same time, that's all underscored by a very sort of polished, clean, dark hardwood, and that's to me what it smells like. It's a very clean wood with a very sort of salty mineral stone sort of aspect to it, and I don't really get a lot else other than that. It does have a sort of slight plasticky vibe to it, and I think that probably would put a lot of people off. I guess that's just in that sea salt kind of note, that sea salt kind of illusion that they're trying to paint. But it's nice, and I really enjoyed it, and I wore this a lot in the summer. I didn't expect to like it as much as I did, but when I did enjoy it, and I did end up wearing it loads throughout all of the summer. So yeah, that was another good one for the spring and summer, I think. So the next couple are ones that I wore sort of throughout the year, not so much kind of like in any given season. But first up is Burj Khalifa by Alexandra Fragrances, which is just a small like 10 ml travel spray that I had of it. But it's a clone of I think Amber Oud by Roja Dove. So it's their clone by that, clone of that. And I really liked it. I wasn't sure what to expect of it, because I'd heard that they do a really good clone of a lot of the Rojas that they clone are like decent clones. And I'd heard that this was a really good clone of Amber Oud. And I like Amber Oud, but I don't own it yet. And it's one that I probably will own in the future. But I don't own it yet because I'm not super keen on Roja fragrances generally. So I thought I'd just get this to kind of paper the cracks until I can kind of be bothered to spring for a full bottle of the proper Roja one. And I found it really nice. And I do have a decant of Amber Oud, and side by side, I think they're really good. In the air, I think this is as good as Amber Oud. I think they're really close. On paper, I think you can, if you're sort of like concentrating on it and you've got a discerning sort of nose, then I think you'll pick differences and flaws and things like that. Having said that, this lasts an age, like it lasts forever. It's nuclear performance. So on that note, it's really good, and I really enjoy it. To say what it actually smells like, it's kind of like it does have like an oud note in there, and it's an oud and rose mainly, but there's a lot of other sort of florals and sort of berries in there. It's quite a berry fruity number. That kind of melds with the florals very well, so you get a kind of jammy berry floral scent in the middle there. And there is some, I believe it's supposed to be ambergris, but it gives a kind of slight musky amber to that sort of base. I really enjoyed it. Like I say, it's mainly like an oudy rose that sort of focuses on a very sort of musky amber with sort of fruits and florals to sort of bolster that middle section. But I enjoyed it a lot, and I wore it a lot, and pretty much throughout all of the year, all seasons, I really enjoyed it. So as a clone, I think it's a really good clone. Whether or not that sits well with you, that's up to you. That you make that call. I do think it's pretty close to the original. Wore it a lot, and enjoyed it a lot. So yeah, that's on the list. Another fragrance that I wore a lot throughout all of the year was Ganache Parfum One-Legged Joe. Now, this is an interesting one in that I really like the Joe collection from Ganache Parfum, but Ganache Parfum are this small indie house from America. They make massive gourmand perfumes, and they're hugely gourmand. They're like sweet beyond anything. I mean, even you sniff this and it will give you diabetes. It's seriously sweet, oftentimes quite cloying. This one is, like overtly sweet and cloying. But I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it a lot. And I got it second hand, which was a real turn up for the books, because they're not easy to get hold of over here. In America, I think they're probably slightly easier to get, but certainly not over here. And the Joe collection, even more so, is difficult to get hold of, because the guy that runs this company is really sort of all over the shop in terms of supply. And the Joe collection came out a few years back, and I really enjoyed every one that I smelt, and I owned a couple of them. But I didn't ever own this one, and then this one came up second hand, so I jumped on it. But it's a beautiful fragrance, and if you like New Harlem by Bond Number 9, if you remember that fragrance, this is like that, but on steroids. It's, people say, you know, like New Harlem smelt like pancakes and you know, a Sunday breakfast in an IHOP or something, I think, and that's basically what this is based on. And it's maple syrup and pancakes and butter and sugar, and there's a hint of coffee in there as well. So all of the Joe collection is based around coffee, really. But it's beautiful, but it's so sickly. But somehow it wears all right, despite it being quite cloying. And I wore this a lot, and it's like I say, it's unabashedly gourmandy, violently sweet, but just really nice to throw on sometimes, and really good fun to throw on sometimes. And a good thing with it is it doesn't last an overly long amount of time, like 5-6 hours, and it's pretty much done. Which actually I found suited this, because it was so over the top sometimes, like, you know, so sweet, you didn't need it a lot. So there were some mornings that I just put this on just to kind of give me that kind of zip and zing in the morning. That was like, yeah, this is, you know, grossly over the top, but enjoyable and fun, and it brings a smile to your face, and that's what you need, right? And then by the afternoon it had kind of faded, and I could wear something else, but a really nice fragrance, and it's photorealistic of what it says on the tin. It's, you know, like maple syrup, pancakes, butter, and coffee, and it smells precisely like that. It's not even like, there's no abstract here. It's bang on that. It's yeah, it's very literal. Nice, interesting. If you can get hold of it, certainly recommend to try, because very interesting. Most people, I think, will probably say they wouldn't choose to smell like this. It's a nice smell, but perhaps you wouldn't choose to smell like it, and I can understand that. Like I say, I enjoyed it as a fun throw-on several times throughout the year, and just found it a little bit different. And like I say, it didn't last an overtly long amount of time, so it was okay. Yeah, One-Legged Joe, wore that quite a bit. So sticking to the warmer days, on the warmer days of the year, this was one that I wore a fair bit of, was Superdenord by Bortnikov. The notes of Superdenord are bergamot, orange, peach, nutmeg, oak moss, benzoin, Siberian deer musk, cedar, birch tar, and tonka bean. So this was a challenging one for me. This was a difficult one, because I'm not a massive fan of Bortnikov, and I don't like the whole kind of like fascination that the brand has with deer musk, and I find it, I'm going to sound really hypocritical here because I've got a bottle of it, but I find it really wrong. But I managed to kind of get hold of this one second hand, and somehow I justified it to myself that if I'm buying it second hand, then that's kind of okay. Still don't massively sit right with me, but it was interesting to try it and smell it, and, you know, it is what it is. Maybe I'm a massive hypocrite, whatever. As a fragrance though, it's really nice. It's not as good as I'd hoped, but somehow there's something about it that captivated me, and it did draw me in again and again, and I did end up wearing it an awful lot in those warmer days. As a peachy chypre, it instantly is going to kind of draw comparisons with Mitsuoko by Galan, probably, just not from the smell exactly, but if you look at those notes on paper, you're instantly sort of like jump to things like Mitsuoko. I don't think it's that similar, actually. The peach notes presented very differently here, but I did like it, and it does have a strong peach note that maintains all the way through. There is that very pissy musk note in there as well. I thought at first it has this kind of like very like toilet cubicle sort of vibe to it. Like I say, it's very pissy, and it does smell like a public toilet at times. But it's very nice, and something kept drawing me back to it again and again and again in those kind of in that warmer weather. So yeah, that was one that I suppose was a bit of a turn up for the books. It's not something I ever expected to buy, nor was it something I ever expected to wear a lot of. But I ended up wearing a lot of it this year, so it has to go, has to go in the list. So for the last of the brighter, more kind of every season or summer season or, you know, warmer weather fragrances. The last of those that I wore this year quite a lot of was Le Capitao by Zadig. The notes of Le Capitao are strawberry, caramel, peach, labdanum, leather, saffron, amber, ginger, rose, bourbon vanilla and benzoin. So I bought this originally for that strawberry note. I thought that's quite interesting. You don't get a lot of strawberry notes in perfumes, and when you do, they tend to be sort of presented in quite sort of juvenile ways. And I just didn't think that Zadig would do that with a strawberry note. So I was curious about it. My interest was piqued. And I did really enjoy it in this. The strawberry note's really interesting. When you spray it, you do get that initial burst of strawberry, and it isn't a juvenile strawberry. It smells somehow quite grown up, and it's like sort of fresh and fleshy and photorealistic. But very quickly, it actually fades away, and you get more of the peach and the caramel, and specifically the amber. And it's the amber that really sticks with it and stays with the whole fragrance, the life of the fragrance, and draws you in. And it's a really nice, bright, sparkly amber. And of course, with that sort of strawberry and peach in the top, that does last the life of the fragrance. It just kind of gives it a sparkle of, you know, it gives the amber a little sparkle, a little something, a little kind of like nice pick me up. Which sort of stops it being a very sort of domineering or dark or sort of resinous amber. It's none of those things. It's far more fluid, and it feels more sort of viscous than that, and like I say, quite bright and sparkly. And I found that quite interesting for an amber, and I found myself, like I say, wearing this a fair bit in those kind of warmer days. But yeah, that was a nice wear and a good find this year. So that's Le Capitao by Zadig. So we'll stick with Zadig. Another Zadig that I wore a lot of this year, and more so in the kind of slightly cooler weather, was Zadig Don. Now Zadig Don is actually a tobacco fragrance, and the notes in it are tobacco, whiskey, gunpowder, and spun sugar. And this is a really interesting fragrance in that, as a tobacco fragrance, I think it's pretty bad. It's quite a synthetic tobacco. That kind of like gunpowder element, like lasts, when you spray it, you do get a kind of smoky gunpowder, and it smells amazing, but it doesn't last long. It disappears quite quickly. And then after that, you get this kind of like quite sweet whiskey and tobacco. But they both smell quite synthetic. It's a very synthetic smelling fragrance. But something about it I enjoy, and I've never had anyone sort of say anything bad about it. Everyone has always said like, "Oh, that's nice. What are you wearing?" You know, it's as far as like, you know, I hesitate to say it in a top 10 list at that, but it's kind of a compliment getter. You know, it's definitely one that has always received sort of good remarks from the Muggle world, at least. So yeah, you know, that's Zadig Don. It's like I say, a very synthetic rum and tobacco. It's not overly boozy or anything like that. It's more about that kind of tobacco than it is the rum, or the whiskey rather. The whiskey, you know, is more, just gives it a bit of a sharp side to that sort of smooth tobacco. But they're both very synthetic. But something about it is just works for me, and I just like it. It's a very easy to like fragrance, very, very easy to like fragrance. And I think personally one of the best from the Join the Club line of Zadig. So yeah, I wore that a lot throughout pretty much all the year, actually. Mostly less so in the summer, but more in the spring and the autumn. But yeah, definitely wore that quite a lot. So getting to the winter fragrances now, the fragrances I wore sort of more last winter and sort of coming into this winter. I haven't worn this so much this winter, but definitely in like last sort of January, February sort of time, I wore this one quite a lot, and this is Musc Immortel by Atelier d'Or. And the notes of Musc Immortel are iris, grapefruit, clary sage, Haitian vetiver, cypriot oil, patchouli, immortelle, ambret, and musk. And yeah, it's quite clearly that. It has that spiciness of the Immortelle and the vetiver, and it has a really smoothness, a smooth side to it with the iris. The cypriot oil definitely gives it an earthy dirtiness, and sort of throughout it all, it's got this sort of dark musk, and it's slightly pissy with that musk. But I really liked it, and I really do like it. It's very. I don't think it's the easiest fragrance to wear, but somehow again, like I find this one to be not challenging, but I don't feel like it's a crowd pleaser at all. Let's put it that way. You know, it's a completely opposite of Don. Yeah, it's not the most challenging fragrance in the world, but it's not the easiest by any stretch of the imagination. It has that, you know, it's got those spicy elements from the Immortelle and the pissy elements from the musk, and it, like, you know, that's not the easiest. But again, gets a lot of compliments. I had a lot of people sort of mention like that you know, that's a nice fragrance, which surprised me every time actually, because I fully didn't expect that. But yeah, no, it's a really good fragrance, and I really enjoy it. That say, that iris is a cracker in this, because it really smooths out, and it blends so well with the spiciness of the vetiver and the Immortelle, which are quite spicy in this for sure. They give it, like the Immortelle gives it that kind of almost like savoury curried vibe. And then the vetiver, definitely, it's the more sort of spicy sort of vetiver rather than sort of grassy vetiver that you get. And then you've got the cypriot, which just is dirty and earthy. You know, you put all those together, and yeah, it's quite a dark fragrance, but definitely that it's smoothed out and just almost like covered by that iris that sort of takes off any rough edge. You know, it kind of clouds over it and just rounds it out and smooths it out, and all those kind of rough edges from the Immortelle and the spices and the Nagamortha or the cypriot or whatever, you know, all of that is kind of cocooned in this iris that smooths it out and makes it a lot more palatable. So a really nice fragrance in total, but very dark, and definitely one for the colder weather. And I wore it a lot, and I will wear it a lot. Again, in like January, February time of this winter, because it's a lovely fragrance. But to me, it just works really well in those really deep, dark depths of winter. But really nice, really nice fragrance. So this one I'll just talk about quickly, because you know, almost it's a kind of add-on. It was Vanilla Diorama by Christian Dior, the Privé line, and I wore this a fair bit recently. I just did a review on it, but it's a really nice fragrance for the colder weather, very cozy, warm vanilla. If you want to know more about that one, so there's a review that I put up like just a few days ago, so probably best just to go check that out if you're interested. But yes, we'll move on pretty sharpish from that. So last up, then the last fragrance I wore a lot of this year, and probably the fragrance I wore the most of this year, and I think it's probably a colder weather fragrance, but I wore it pretty much throughout all the year. Hot days, cold days, mild days. I just wore it whenever I wanted to wear it, I wore it because I really enjoyed it. And that's Nuitafur by Louis Vuitton, which is probably fast becoming like one of my all-time favourite fragrances. Wore it more than any other fragrance. I've dented the bottle more than any other bottle I've probably ever dented. You know, this I think probably I wore almost like a third of my time wearing fragrances probably went to Nuitafur, which was quite a surprise. But there you go. If you're not aware of it, it's a incense, but it's very like sort of Eastern incense, Middle Eastern incense with a leather note, and that's really about it. Really, there's supposed to be an oud in there. I don't get a lot of that. For me, it's mainly just like a big leather note. It's quite clean. I don't think it's anything animalic, but it's just a very nice sort of suede leather note, sort of amped up to sort of extreme levels with a Middle Eastern sort of dusty incense on top of that, and that's about it. A little bit smoky, quite dark, but just gorgeous. And that one, despite those notes being like, you know, like sort of suede leather that's, say, not animalic in any way, but it's not super easy. And then on top of that, you've got that kind of dusty, slightly sort of smoky incense, which gives it a bit of a dirty edge. You know, it's not the easiest fragrance again, but somehow this, I feel, is. You know, it's not. It takes elements that are quite difficult, but somehow presents it in a way that's very appealing. So yeah, a really nice fragrance and very, like I say, very appealing. So yeah, check that out if you like. So that was pretty much my year in fragrances. Definitely they were, say, like the top 9 or 10 fragrances that I wore throughout the year, sort of again and again and again, and most of them I can still see myself wearing again and again and again next year, you know, because every time I picked them up to do this video, I was like, oh yeah, I remember why I like this, or I remember why I wore this a lot. So I stand behind every single one of them. It's funny because sometimes you pick something off the shelf and you're like, oh, I wore this a lot this year, and then you smell it and you think, but why? Because it's, you know, already you've gone off of it. But I think these fragrances, every single one of them, I picked them up off the shelf and I sniffed the lid and I was like, yeah, I remember why I wore that a lot. I remember what I liked about that. And so yeah, I stand pretty much behind all of these. It's, you know, I think I had pretty good taste this year. Maybe you lot might think slightly differently. But yeah, thanks very much for watching. Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. I hope you all have a happy and healthy holiday season with you and your families, and we'll see you real soon. Cheers. Thanks for watching.